folding chairs in the back of that banquet hall made a sound I still hear sometimes, that hollow scrape against linoleum when 40 people turn to look at you at the same time. It was the second Saturday in October, one of those days in coastal Georgia where the heat hasn't decided to quit yet, and the air smells like salt and cut grass. My brother Nate was getting married. I had driven 11 hours from Fort Campbell to be there. I was 31 years old. I was wearing my dress uniform, and my mother hadn't spoken a word to me since I walked through the door. Let me back up. I grew up in Brunswick, Georgia, the kind of town where everybody knows your daddy's name before they know yours. My father ran a hardware store on Newcastle Street for 30 years. Same store his father started. Same green awning, same bell above the door, same smell of motor oil and sawdust that I can still conjure if I close my eyes. My brother Nate was always going to take it over someday. That was understood. That was the plan. And I was supposed to, I don't know, marry someone local, work at the county school board maybe, help out at the store on weekends. That was the plan for me. I never told my parents I wanted something different until the night before my high school graduation. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, and I just said it. I want to enlist. Army. I've already talked to a recruiter. My mother put down her fork very slowly. My father said, "What for?" Not, "That's interesting, tell me more." Not, "Are you sure?" Just, "What for?" Like the question didn't have a real answer. I told them what for. I told them I wanted to serve. I told them it felt like the only thing I'd ever been completely certain about. My mother said I'd been watching too much TV. My father said the Army was fine for people who didn't have other options. But we had a family business, and family came first. Nate, who was 17 and already had his name on the store's business cards, looked at me across the table and said, "You'll wash out in a month." He wasn't mean about it. That was just what he believed. I shipped to Fort Jackson 6 weeks later. Basic was, I won't romanticize it. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. There were mornings at 4 a.m. when I was doing flutter kicks in Georgia clay, and I genuinely couldn't remember why I'd wanted this. There were nights when the girl on the bunk above me cried into her pillow, and I pretended not to hear because we were all pretending not to hear, because that was the only mercy we could offer each other. I made it through. I made it through AIT. I got my first duty assignment at Fort Stewart, 40 minutes from Brunswick, and I called home to tell my mother. She said, "That's nice, honey. Are you coming home for Christmas?" I said yes. I came home for Christmas. Nate was dating a girl named Paige, a dental hygienist from Savannah with a long braid and a bright laugh. My father had put up new shelving in the store. My mother made her cornbread stuffing and pretended everything was normal. Nobody asked about my work. Nobody asked what I did or where I'd been or what it was like. My dad asked if I'd met any nice men. I went back to Fort Stewart and made a promise to myself I would stop expecting them to understand. I would just do the work. The work turned out to be my whole life, and I don't mean that as a complaint. I deployed twice before I was 26. Once to Kuwait, once to a part of Afghanistan I'm still not supposed to name in casual conversation. I came back from the second deployment with a commendation I didn't know what to do with, and a quietness inside me that took a couple years to fully understand. I was promoted to Staff Sergeant, then Sergeant First Class. I went to the Warrant Officer Candidate School at Fort Rucker, and came out the other side as a Will 1, which my mother celebrated by sending me a card with a watercolor bird on the front, and a note that said she hoped I was eating enough vegetables. I don't want you to think she didn't love me. She did. She just had no framework for who I was becoming. Neither did my father. Neither did Nate. I was living in a world they didn't have language for, and instead of asking me to teach them the language, they just spoke louder in the one they already knew. Over the years, they called me when things went wrong. My father's back surgery. I flew home on emergency leave and sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, then drove him home and stayed for 2 weeks because my mother couldn't manage the stairs alone. When Nate's first business, a landscaping company he'd started on the side, went under, I wired him $4,000 without being asked because I knew he was too proud to say he needed it. When my mother's sister died and they couldn't cover the funeral costs, I sent a check. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't want credit. They were my family. What I wanted, what I told myself I didn't need and then found myself aching for anyway at 2 in the morning on bases in places I can't name, was for one of them to say, just once, I'm proud of you. I see what you've done. I see who you are. 3 words. 11 years. I kept waiting. Nate got engaged to Paige in February of last year. I found out by text, a group message to me and 6 other people, a photo of the ring, 3 heart emojis. I sent back a heart and a message that said I was so happy for them and I meant it. I genuinely did. My mother called a week later to talk about the wedding. October in Brunswick, she said. Paige's family was from Savannah, but her parents had rented out the Coastal Oaks event venue. A nice place, the kind of venue with white string lights and live oaks draped in Spanish moss. 140 guests, sit-down dinner, band, the whole thing. And then, at the end of the call, almost like she was reading a grocery list, she said, "Nate wanted me to mention, and I'm just passing it along." This is what he said. "He'd prefer if you didn't come in uniform. Paige's family is very formal, and they don't want it to be a whole thing." I stayed quiet for a moment. "What kind of thing?" I asked. "You know, people making a fuss. It being about you instead of about them." I said I understood. I told her I'd think about it. I got off the phone and sat in my kitchen at Fort Campbell for a long time, looking at nothing. By that point, I was a Chief Warrant Officer 3. I had 17 years of service. I had been in country during 2 significant operations. I had trained soldiers who had gone on to serve in every corner of the world. I had received commendations I didn't talk about at family dinners because nobody had ever asked. I had also, not insignificantly, covered my brother's $4,000 debt without a word, paid my parents' property taxes twice during slow years at the store, and flown home on leave every time there was a crisis, whether that was a surgery or a funeral or just my mother going through a hard season. And the ask was, don't wear your uniform, it might make it about you. I told myself I was fine with it. I drove down to Fort Campbell's clothing sales the next week and bought a dress anyway, a dark green wrap dress, understated, appropriate. I hung it in my closet and looked at it for 6 weeks. 3 days before the wedding, I still hadn't packed it. I stood in my bedroom at 11 o'clock at night with the closet open. The dress was on one side. My Army service uniform was on the other. Pressed, complete, the CW3 bars on the shoulders, the unit crest, the shoulder sleeve insignia, the service ribbons I'd collected over 17 years. I had earned every single piece of it. Every stripe, every ribbon, every device. My father used to say about the hardware store, "You hang what you've built. You don't apologize for what you built." He said that about the store. He never said it about me. I took the dress off its hanger and put it in my bag. Then I stood there another minute. Then I took it back out. I drove to Brunswick the next morning with my uniform in a garment bag in the back seat. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I had thought about it seriously. I had waited. A retired or off-duty service member can choose whether or not to wear their uniform at a formal civilian occasion. It's appropriate either way, and I knew that. What I also knew was that this was a formal event, that a dress uniform is formal attire, and that asking me to hide what I had built my entire adult life around on the day I was supposed to celebrate my brother felt like being asked to arrive as a smaller version of myself so no one would be inconvenienced by the full one. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I parked in the lot at Coastal Oaks 40 minutes before the ceremony. I sat in my car and did my cover check, hat straight, brass centered, ribbons aligned. I had my officer cap in my hand when I got out because you don't wear your cover indoors, and I wasn't going to get that wrong, not today. I walked across the parking lot through the late afternoon heat and pushed open the door. The foyer was already full of guests finding their seats, white flowers everywhere, a string quartet setting up near the window. I could see Paige's mother near the seating chart talking to a woman with silver hair. I could see Nate's 2 college friends by the bar, jackets on, laughing about something. And I could see, immediately, a cluster of men near the left side of the room who were not in uniform, but who were standing the way people who have been in uniform stand, weight distributed. Shoulders square. The kind of stillness that comes from years of being told where to put your body and learning to mean it. One of them looked up first. I recognized the posture before I recognized the face. He was in his late 50s, wearing a gray suit, and when he saw me, specifically the CW3 bars, the unit crest, the ribbons, something shifted in his expression. He said something quietly to the man beside him. Then a second man looked up. Then a third. I kept walking toward the seating chart. I wasn't performing anything. I was just going to find my seat. The first man took a single step forward. Then he came to attention, shoulders back, chin level, heels together, with the precision of someone who has done it 10,000 times and does not need to think about it. He said it quietly, but the room was not that loud. "Chief on deck." The man beside him straightened, then the next one. By the time I reached the seating chart, 8 of them were standing. By the time I found my name tucked at a round table near the back, I noticed the family table nowhere in sight. There were 12. A woman in a navy blazer caught my eye from across the room, nodded once, and stood. A young man in a khaki suit, maybe 23, who had the haircut and the posture of someone very recently separated from service, got to his feet and held it. 14. 15. Someone near the window said, more audibly, "At ease." I heard my mother's voice from somewhere behind me. "What's happening?" I turned around. She was standing with my father at the edge of the doorway, both of them dressed for the occasion. Both of them watching the room with expressions I didn't have words for. My father's eyes went from the room to my uniform to my face. Nate appeared from a side door, still adjusting his boutonniere, and stopped. Paige, who had been briefed by her mother that my attendance was potentially complicated, stepped out behind him and saw 15 people standing in formal posture in the middle of her wedding reception setup. And she, and I will be grateful to her for this, until the day I die, smiled. "Is that your sister?" she said to Nate. He didn't answer right away. I want to tell you I handled the next part with grace and calm. Mostly, I just found my chair and sat down. One of the men, the one in the gray suit who had spoken first, came over a few minutes later and introduced himself. Sergeant Major, retired. 32 years. He shook my hand and said, "Well done, Chief," and I said thank you, and he went back to his table. My father came over before the ceremony started. He sat down next to me, which surprised me, and he didn't say anything for almost a minute. We sat there together watching the florist make last-minute adjustments to the centerpieces. Then he said, "Those men stood up for you." "Yes, sir," I said. "Old habit." "How many years have you been in?" 17, I said. He nodded. He had the expression of a man doing arithmetic he should have done a long time ago. "Your grandfather served," he said. "Did I ever tell you that?" "Korea. He didn't talk about it." "You told me once," I said. He nodded again. "Your mother and I, we didn't know how to." He stopped. "We should have asked more, what it was like." I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't entirely okay, and I thought we both deserved honesty more than comfort. "You could ask now," I said. He looked at me. He had my grandmother's eyes, dark brown, slightly too wide for his face, and in that moment he looked old in a way I wasn't used to seeing, the way parents get old when you're not watching closely enough. "I want to," he said. "I'd like to." We didn't say anything else before the ceremony started, but he stayed in the chair next to mine, which I think was its own kind of sentence. The wedding was beautiful. Paige cried during the vows, the good kind of crying. Nate said his line, "You are the steadiest thing I know," and I believed him. The band started up afterward and the dance floor filled fast. Someone put a glass of sweet tea in my hand, and I drank it, and watched my brother dance with his new wife and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. My mother found me during the cocktail hour. She was holding a glass of white wine, and she looked like she was working up to something that cost her effort. "I should have been proud of you out loud," she said. Not, "I am proud of you," was proud, present tense, past tense, some negotiated form. She said should have been, which meant she was finally doing the arithmetic my father had started. I said, "Thank you." She reached over and straightened one of my ribbons that did not need straightening. It was the most precise thing she'd ever done with my uniform. "Tell me what this one means," she said, touching the service ribbon on the left side. So I told her. She asked about the next one. Then the next. We stood there for 20 minutes, my mother and I, in the middle of my brother's wedding reception, and she asked me about every ribbon I had earned. She didn't understand all of it. She didn't need to. What she was doing was listening, and that was enough. Nate found me after dinner. He'd loosened his tie, and he smelled like champagne, and he had the expression of a man who has been thinking hard about something all night. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. When we were kids, I thought you were. He stopped. I thought you were doing something to prove a point, like a reaction to Dad, to the store, to, I don't know. I didn't think it was real. It was real. I know that now. He looked down at his shoes, then at my uniform. You look like someone I should have known better. I laughed at that because it was exactly the wrong thing to say and also exactly right. You still can, I said. He nodded. Then he hugged me, which Nate and I did not do casually, and I let him. And it was the kind of hug that had 17 years of distance in it and was trying to account for all of them at once. 3 weeks after the wedding, Nate called me on a Sunday morning. He'd signed up to volunteer with the Veterans Housing nonprofit out of Savannah. Skilled trades work, helping veterans who'd come home to places that needed repair. He said Peach had talked him into it, and also his own conscience. And also, I think, a long night of thinking about his sister and what she'd built and what he'd missed while he wasn't watching. He said, I thought you should know. I said, I'm glad. He said, I'm sorry it took a room full of people standing up to make me pay attention. I thought about that for a while after we hung up, about how sometimes the thing you needed was never the gesture itself, not the standing, not the silence, not the room full of people doing the arithmetic. What you needed was just one person who was finally ready to listen. Everything else was just the door they came through. My uniform is back at Fort Campbell, and its garment bag, in the closet of the house I rent off post. The green dress is still there too, on the hanger where I left it. Some days I think I'll donate it. Some days I think I'll donate it. Some days I think I'll keep it, as a reminder of the choice I made instead. My father called last week. He called on a Tuesday, which was unusual. He asked how work was going. Then he asked what I was working on right now. Specifically, what did a Chief Warrant Officer 3 actually do day to day, and could I explain it in a way that someone who has run a hardware store for 30 years could understand? I told him I would try. We talked for an hour. The quietest victories are the ones that don't announce themselves. They just settle, like wood at the end of a long summer, finding the shape they were always going to be. There's a version of that October evening I used to replay differently. In that version, I wore the green dress. I sat at the table near the back, smiled at the right moments, and drove home 11 hours later feeling like I had done the reasonable thing. Nobody made a fuss. Nobody stood up. My father never did the arithmetic. I think about that version sometimes, and I'm glad I don't live in it. What I've come to understand, not quickly, not easily, is that the life I built over 17 years was built on 3 things that don't announce themselves and don't ask for applause. The first is integrity. Not the word on a motivational poster, but the actual practice of it, doing the hard thing when the easier thing is right there, pressed and hanging in your closet. Every time I showed up for my family without being asked, wiring money, flying home on leave, sitting in waiting rooms, that was a choice made from something I didn't have a name for then. I just knew it was right. That knowing, I think, is what integrity feels like from the inside. It's quiet. It costs you. You do it anyway. The second thing is stretchment, the kind that comes from paying attention over a long time. I didn't walk into that wedding venue performing anything. I had thought it through seriously. I knew the regulations. I knew what a dress uniform means at a formal occasion. I knew the difference between making something about yourself and simply refusing to make yourself smaller. That distinction matters. Judgment is what lets you hold both things at once. Respect for the occasion and respect for yourself. When you spend years training yourself to assess situations clearly, to separate what's actually true from what's just loud, you start applying that same clarity to your own life. It changes how you make decisions. It changes what you're willing to accept. The third thing is the one that took me longest to name: endurance. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that gets a ceremony. The slow kind. The 11-year kind. The kind where you keep showing up for people who haven't yet figured out how to show up for you. Not because you're a saint, but because you've decided that's the person you want to be, regardless of the return. That's harder than basic training. There's no graduation date. You just keep going, and you trust that the person you're becoming in the process is worth it. What I didn't expect, what I couldn't have planned for, is that endurance sometimes creates its own reckoning. Not through force, not through confrontation. Just by continuing to exist fully, until the people around you finally have to see you. 15 people stood up in that room. not because I demanded recognition. They stood up because they recognized something, and in seeing it, they made it impossible for the people who loved me to keep not seeing it. My father called on a Tuesday and asked me to explain my work. My mother straightened a ribbon she didn't need to straighten and asked what it meant. Nate signed up to fix houses for veterans he'd never met. None of that happened because I asked for it. It happened because I stopped shrinking, and the truth of what I'd built had nowhere left to hide. I don't know if my family will ever fully understand what 17 years of service looks like from the inside, but they're asking now. And I've learned that asking is where everything real begins. The quietest victories are the ones that don't announce themselves. They just settle, like wood at the end of a long summer, finding the shape they were always going to be.